All right. So here we are in our next chapter. IAM, Identity and Access Management. So we'll try to go over some basic IAM policies, concepts that would be covered in the AWS console. This will be policies, evaluation logic, and implementing security best practices. So your basic prereqs are going to be your account, basic understanding of JSON syntax, usually key value pair, and then familiarity with AWS services. So first, we're going to go to IAM. How do you do that? You type in IAM right here, or click on the nine-sided. You go, let's say, I think it would be security. Here you go, IAM. And when you're in the IAM service, and you can see, here's an overview, right? So from here, you can see the users. This would be individual user accounts. Typically, you wouldn't use this in a production environment or on your job. There's groups, which would be used limit sparingly. So users and groups would be used sparingly. That's what I'll say. Roles would typically be used. So here's where we go. Users would have individual user accounts, right? That would be, think about your name, your email address, whatever it be. Organizations or groups would be for organizing users with similar permissions. And then roles would be permissions for specific AWS services or cross-account access. Then you have policies. And policies are how you create and manage permissions documents. So let's go through here. Here's my users. And where's my groups? I don't have any groups, but I would basically patch those in. The roles. So there's roles that AWS defines, and then there's ones that you can create yourself. And then you have policies, which AWS defines, or you can create your own by yourself. And then you have identity providers, right? And this configures external identity sources, something from, let's say, your Active Directory. All right, so how do you create an identity or a policy? All right, first I'll go to policies, click a policy, and then you'll see, well, go back. You'll see the managed policies by AWS. And then these can also include the ones you create here. So customer managed. So I made a basic one. AWS managed for job functions. And then all of the AWS managed. You can see 1,300 of them. All right. So what you want to do is try and create a custom policy, right? So you can do this with the visual editor here, where you can choose the common services, or you can do it with the JSON directly. And this is the programmatic way. And so from this, you would be able to select either in the visual, you could be able to select, let's say, an S3, right? EC2, so something workload oriented, or IAM, something for access, right? And then you could choose specific actions. So let's say IAM, and then let's say pass. Okay, so this could be get password policy, and you could add this. There's a read, write. Pass roll is usually a very popular one, depending on what you're looking for, right? And you'd be able to add these on, and you can add more permissions for different services. And then this would also be converted over here in the JSON version, okay? So I can show you how we would create a simple policy. I'll copy the one that I have on hand, right? So this one would be S3 get an object. So it would get an object from this bucket, whatever the title is, your bucket title, right? But just make sure this is a bucket that actually exists, okay? And then it would enable secure transfer from this statement, okay? Now this might not be an accurate statement, but that's okay. All right, and then you click next. Well, you click next, name the policy, and click create. Okay, so I'll cancel out of that. You sure you want to cancel? Yes, we're going to cancel this. So let's do a simple policy like a not action. Okay, so let's click a policy to say route 53, add more. So I am. So we can include a lot on this. CloudFront, oh, CloudFront, and then say support. Okay. So let's say all. This would be way too permissive, but I'm just giving you an idea of all the permissions it allows. See this? This is all the permissions, okay? You can do all, or you can do specific, all right? And then, let's see, user MFA, request from IP. Okay, let's just do all. Let's try, where is it? Oh, there you go, all. Okay, select all. Okay, and so we can also select specific ones instead. And we go next. Okay, from here, you name your policy, practice policy, and then you can have these permissions defined, show all of them here, and you click create. All right. Next, let's go to an IAM role. Now, what is a role? A role is something you would use to create so that you can have an access to a resource without sticking it to a specific user or user in a group. So basically, when you need a resource to work, it would be able to enable that. So let's go create role. Choose a AWS service. You have also different options. The service, this allows something like an EC2, a Lambda, or whatnot to be able to execute limited based on the policies for this role. Then you can use this for accounts to have this work in other accounts. Web identity lets this federate across identities. SAML does this for corporate directory. And then custom, well, you can do a lot with this. Okay, this does it a lot more programmatically. All right, so what you want to do, let's say the AWS service, let's say cross account. Okay, so you want to do this with another account. You can enter the account ID. All right, but this is the problem. But let's do this with this account. Click next. And then with this account, we can add permissions. So we can do it here, or we can set the boundary. Yeah. Set the policy, set the permissions boundary. So you can choose one or more roles. Let's try S3. I'll just do full access. And then the permissions boundary. So this controls the maximum that you can have, right? So if you want stuff with S3, if you wanted to have a fully multi-stack, meaning database tier, storage tier, application tier, network tier, and then have this all interact, you can limit what else can be on here so that only certain things can have permissions going. So let's just go for this. And then you can configure this for cross-account access if you wanted to within this, but that would be a little bit different. Basically, you would have to add a second exception here. Can I click? Let me edit this. Oh, nope. Let's go next. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Let's just hit the admin. Jeez Louise. All right. You would add one here, right between right between this. Move that statement down, and you'd have an effect to allow a certain ID, another ID. Okay. And at that point, you could attach those policies and set the name, and then click create. All right. So let's go back to permissions boundaries a little bit. This shows, let's see, create role. Let's go here for AWS service. Oh, let's see, S3. Okay. Let's see, S3. All right, so here's permission boundaries, right? So with permission boundaries, you can apply these boundaries and select the boundaries for where it's applied. Okay. And then also you can do a policy simulation, which really helps you to know what exactly is going on. All right, so let's go over here. Let me see. Where is it? Why don't I see it? Policy simulator. There we go. Okay. So there's the policy simulator. So this lets you generate certain policies based off of what you want to do. Okay. You can look at your users. Let's say this role. This role has no policies, but this pulled from my own account, right? This role has certain policies assigned to it. And so you can see how far it's limited to, okay? So you can run, oops, select the service. Let's try API gateway, select all, run a simulation. So this is what the policy would look like if you wanted to add this to your role, okay? So this gives you an idea of how to do this. And you should be able to do multiples. Let me see. API gateway. And so you can do this by linking these policies up programmatically to be able to test these. All right. And this will reveal any particular context for this policy once you're able to review it. Then what you can do after that is go to CloudTrail. All right. So this will be in your monitoring. We'll see if we can find that here. It would be under management, I believe management and governance. Yeah, CloudTrail, same difference. Okay. And so for here, you can create a trail to see what's actually going on. All right. So create trail and then look for the event history and enable this with your IAM policy. Okay. And then from there, you can go for access analysis. So this would let you analyze this for your account. Access analyzer. All right, this will be working in tandem with your CloudWatch, CloudTrail, and then you create this. So this looks for access findings, unused findings, so you can start moving IAM users or roles or groups down in their permissions and access capabilities. Okay, so you could create this, set up external or unused, and then see if it's on the current organization, current account, and then move forward from there. You could set this for unused access, external access, or public resources. Okay. And then you can do a credential report. Okay. So the credential report would basically be able to list your IAM users and their status. And you could store this on your local to be able to verify for audit, which would be incredibly useful. You can also do config rules. So let's go to AWS config. This is for your resources. This is basically your go-to Bible of everything that exists here. So where would this be? Be management and governance, config. Okay. And so you can record everything that gets built, everything that gets accessed, and then all the resources all at once. All right. It does have a cost. You can see the pricing calculator, right, where it's built in. But then you can manage your rules after the facts, right? So you can add the policies here and just see what goes on throughout this. And you can monitor this with your guard duty, which is attached as well. So that lets you know who's actually trying to enter your system, what's going on with it as well. And so that would be under the 9 digits under security, identity, and compliance. All right, so common pitfalls would be syntax errors. You saw that those red dots when I was trying to create an IAM earlier. Let's see. So let's go policy, create policy. When we're doing this in the JSON, you'll see a red dot on this side, usually where the numbers are, and that shows that something's not exactly right. Sometimes you could be missing a comma, right? There you go. See, it's a syntax error. You need that comma there. So this has to have its own. This has its own specific language. Then you have to make sure everything's formatted. You don't want to have something far out like that because it might not make sense to the casual eye. And then make sure all the resource paths are laid out correctly. So your resources could be anything from an S3 bucket to an API gateway to any of the resource you create on this. And so remember, for permissions, explicit deny always wins. Check for the boundaries using your IAM policy analyzer. And then also for something that you might not see, look at your VPC service protection. Because sometimes there might be permissions on your environment that are not directly tied to IAM. It might be tied to actual resources within your region. And so that might limit you. And then use the policy simulator to test and then deploy and then see what works. And then you can go back and have with your own notes and in your mind what actually works in production or in your dev environment, wherever you actually are building. So one thing you want to do is check your source, make sure everything walks okay, and then go back to the bare bones. Follow least privilege, use permission boundaries, test your policies, monitor your access with CloudTrail and Cloud Config, and then review the permissions and access on a regular basis. The exam will cover all of these, but this is a good overview so you can understand what you're supposed to do and how do you configure your environment and who uses and what can be used in it and by what. Next, we'll go to security token. So STSS or STS. Okay, security token. All right, so this is slightly related to IAM, but let's continue out of this. Why am I not seeing it? So STS is something working in the background. Okay, so what you want to do is find, where is it? I don't want an account alias. No. What you want to do is find your STS settings. Where are we going to find that? Why am I not finding it? I am not finding this. We're on the dashboard. Oh, hmm. Source control. Why am I not seeing this? Okay, so what we wanted to do is go and find the ATS settings. All right, so this is a secure token service, right? This creates trusted users with temporary credentials who can access your AWS resources, right? So you go to account settings and you scroll down to make sure that everything is set up for the endpoints to be correctly done, right? So you look at the session tokens, compatibility settings for each one. You set this to be enabled or disabled, and all these endpoints would work correctly, right? So review the regions, look at the regions, and see if they're what their status is. If it's active, it can be used. If it's inactive, you don't want to it won't work there, right? And so you do this to enable STS version tokens for better performance. The benefits of these endpoints would be reduced latency, redundancy, or built-in redundancy, increased section token validity, and this will be valid in all regions. So what you could do in this is use session tokens. Okay, so this is only valid in the AWS regions. Okay, this is enabled in all. At this point, you can update something like this, deactivate, which I don't want to do. But this gives you an idea that these tokens can be configured to work for your regions, but they can be manually enabled or disabled. And you can allow cross-account access with this. Okay, so what you could do is create a role. Let's say, you create the role, select AWS account, and choose another AWS account, and enter the ID of this account, whatever this would be, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. There. I don't know whose account that is. All right, but this is just an idea of what you're going to do. And so then you can configure a trust policy with this, and then use an external ID, right? So you would check to require the external ID, and then you could use this for whatever it would be. And then enter unique ID like whatever your company's name, the environment, and the ID. So Walmart dev, let's say date 2025 ID, right? Something like that. It can be whatever. And then require MFA for additional security. Click next. I don't know whose this is going to go to, but that's interesting. And then you can attach some permissions within this. So this would be for relevant policies like S3, CloudWatch, whatever, right? And at this point, you would be able to create this cross-account role that would be able to access S3 so that the account would be able to reach whatever you need. Okay, so let's say another permission you want, and I showed this briefly earlier, called assume role. So this is one of the useful portions of the services. So in this, under policies, you can have certain services like a EC2 assume a role. So this would be able to perform an action without the human doing it. This is where you start talking about agents and automation, and this is when the cloud actually starts to make a lot of sense. So we can do this in the JSON tab. Let's see. Oh, no, I'm in roles. So we were doing this, we want to do policies, right? Um, Policy, create a policy. And so we can do a JSON to show you what that looks like. Okay. All right. So this is what an assume role is here. And this would need an actual ID number here. But this will let you do something similar where you could enter the actual account, let's say your production account, that would be able to do this. And you would attach this policy with the next, name it, and then you could set from permission definitions. In addition, add your tags and click create the policy. All right. And then with this point, you could add this policy to your users or groups. All right. Okay. Just click this. All right. So next you want to do targeting across account access. So once you have that assume role policy added, then you want to be able to test to see if the role is working. The best way to do this is in the CLI. I'll show you the commands that can actually do this the best. All right, give me a second, and I'll copy this to show what this looks like. Okay, so you see this AWS SCS assume role, the role ARN. This hits with your cost account, with the target account, and then what's the role session name, team access, and the external ID. So you've created all this stuff, what we've talked about earlier. Okay. Clear. Okay. And then you can monitor all of this as well in CloudTrail. And you'd have to go, let's see, CloudTrail. And from here, you can go for event history. Let's close this up. Event history. And from here, you'd be able to see everything here. Your assume role, like you see here, this is everything that has happened over the past few days that I've taught this. Okay, and you can check for any resources that have been allowed or denied based on that assume role that we were just talking about. And then you can also do some other things once you have your systems getting built. You should go and learn how to revoke credentials. So in IAM, the easiest way to do this, roles, find your role, let's say S3, no, photo. Ah, there could be a role. We can click this. All right. And then you look around, you could delete it, but that's not exactly what you want to do. Go to the revoke sessions. Then you could revoke the active sessions, right? And from here, this would warn about any current sessions being validated, and you click revoke it to confirm. And this would take the role that is attached and remove it from this and revoke it. And it would create a revocation policy. So this policy is very important because it denies all actions for tokens issued before the revocation time. So then there's advanced portions, but we're going to move away from those because we want you to understand this on a basic level. All right. I would consider these things to be extra. All right. So let's go to another thing. All right. So this is some things you can do for best practices in security, like enable MFA for role assumption. I'm going to use this document just to show you what that looks like. All right, so you can have this multi-factor authentication set to true, which allows this, right? And it has it set for the age must be less than 3,600 seconds or minutes. So it's 3,600 seconds, I believe, would be, oof, I cannot remember this. So 600 seconds would be 10 minutes. So this would be uh, like 60 minutes, so an hour. Wow, my math is not that great. So this would be a good example of something. You could also restrict by IP, okay? So this would be a way that you can look at the source IP, what's the condition, IP address, source IP, right? An external ID, right? So this would be an IP-based condition added to your trust policy. With this, you can set up your monitoring and alerting, but that's also important so you know what metrics you want to have, what assume role attempts were failed, what cross-account access patterns were done, and what sessions happened without MFA. Okay, that's good for your knowing your security posture for your organization. And then from here, you can also look at CloudTrail, so you can check for any error messages that might have come in. You can go and look for any policies that might have allowed anything more than the source principal. You can see if external IDs. See this? You have your resources, resource names, events, usernames. A lot of information gets documented here. And then you can check to see what endpoint was activated if that was a major issue. And then you can also resolve your errors with, looking at your regional endpoints, which I showed you in the account settings over here. Um, and you can check to see if STS is enabled for the region or not. And you can set things for all regions, some regions, and you can set things for condition, length, IP, and understand how this works in your office and in your environment and for the exam. Okay, so some things to remember for the exam would be the STS versions, understand the difference between the different versions of them, the external ID, how do you use that with STS, what do you do with cross-account access, credentials, enabling them, revoking them, what are endpoints, regional endpoints, and how are they used, and then how do you use your credentials, your IDs, your MFA, and your session duration. How do we demonstrate that? All right, next we'll go to EC2 instance metadata service, right? This is going to be IMDS. Okay, so what you have to do is go to the EC2. The metadata is very important because you're talking about you're building something, but then you have to show why you're building it. Well, that's not necessarily why it's built. Um, Here you go. Okay, so here, go to the 9-digit, go to compute, go to EC2, right? And then, let's see, EC2 in the service, let's see. We have our instances. We don't have any instances running. Let's launch a new one real quick. Okay. Practice. Instance. We're going to leave this, leave this. We're going to leave this. We're going to select this. And it's on the default. And so then we go down here. Okay. Okay, so here's the metadata version. Here's the metadata information. Okay, so let's open this up to show you here. So this shows the metadata, whether it can be enabled or not. This basically talks to and about the service and how it's going to be tracked. All right, so this is information that goes along to verify what your resource is and how does it actually work within your own system. And then you can add, this is defaulted for accessibility. You can get some tutorial information if you want in here. But this lets you know that this actual instance is something that is being used and can be used by your service. This has some information about the IPv6, which most places don't typically use this. And you're gonna have to go, yeah, you're gonna have to go into other additional resources like AWS Nitro, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then you go into your metadata version, which this is talking about the actual value within this. And so this lets you determine which session type you're going to have based off of your metadata and what's going to communicate between your resources. And you're having your hops, which is how much your resource is going to move along your network and being translated across different networks, because it has to be routed around. So what's that going to hop from and to, internal to your own network, and within this own network and traversing the the AWS backbone, right? And then you can have your tags as well and some user data scripts if you need something to actually be output to be recognized by any other service you might use in your infrastructure deployment. So once you configure all of this, you can do a lot of this to, typically you want to have this enabled. Disabling blocks all metadata access, so that's not very good. So I typically wound up with enabled. Well, it really depends on the purpose. So typically I'll have it set in my launch template, usually enabled. I usually do V2 where the token is required, so there's a trust between the resources. And then the hops, I typically let this go with no more than two. And then one can work, but you really want to set it between 1 and 64. If you have a container environment, you might want to set this higher than 2. So then you can set this to allow the metadata tags, and then tag this as necessary for your environment to be able to work correctly. But this is only enabled for security conditions when you have automation. So there's a lot of different things that might be moving through whatever your environment is. You don't have direct control on. You can stop it if you need to, but you're okay. So let's launch this. That'll be good. Oh, I thought I had a key pair. Okay, let's do this. I really thought. Let's do this. All right, so we have the key. We've launched it. We're good. All right, so let's show this is launched. What you can do after the fact, let's go in here, quick actions, go to instance settings, and we can modify this after the fact. Okay, so we want to change, I think it's, nope, instance. That's one change you can do, but it's already set to allow. Instance settings. There we go. Modify metadata settings. Instance, there we go. And so from here, you can actually update these settings like we just talked about, and they'll change immediately without having to restart it. Okay, and then you can actually create a policy. Let's go back to policies for enforcing metadata. Okay, so this would be very useful for anybody who creates something. This will only create that resource with it. So let's say the policy, let's say the JSON. Okay, so this would deny IMD version 1, right? So that's what that would do. On all resources, you see that star? That's in any resources. And then for EC2s, set up for there. And then this would basically enforce it. You go over here, name it to something very accurate like enforce IMD SV2 forever, right? This is very basic and very generic. And then you could apply it to any other IAM roles you'd have. So actually, let's create it. Also, creating policies does not have any additional costs. So then you can create a bucket policy that has the same thing. So anything that goes in there would have something similar. All right, so let's create a bucket. Let's see. Okay, so you could set this. So let's say you have that EC2 created, and then you want to have an EC2 access a bucket. You could have a role that we created that has the ability to access the bucket. And then that role would be able to access the bucket with the permission that only EC2s that have version 2, INDS version 2, could be able to access this. Okay, so the basic, without creating one, we just go into this bucket. I've shown you this earlier. Go to permissions, bucket policy, you click edit, and then you'd update this with a similar policy. Rename this portion, your bucket name, to which your bucket is actually named to, and then this would follow through with the same permission set. All right, and then you could also do an organization-wide, which would be very useful for certain organizations to maintain a level of security. Okay, so you go over to roles, or policies. Yeah, go to policies. You go to, where's service control? Service control policies. Okay. And then from here, let's see. Oh, darn. You could create a service control policy. So let's see. I already have full access to this, but I don't have full access to this. That's okay. But from here, you can be able to create an actual policy that would deny it throughout your whole organization. So if you have this in multiple accounts, something like that is what would work. So you see so deny without IMDS v2, action of running instances with the ARNs for any EC2, and then the metadata token would be required. Okay. And you name something very direct, like require IMDS v2 for instances added to your organizational accounts. And then you can also go through, make sure this is monitored via CloudWatch on each EC2 and set any alarms if someone tries to create an instance like that and have it set up an SNS notification, right? That simple notification system. All right. And then you could just name it something like IMDS v1 bit has been used, and then set up a rule to check if this is actually existing on any current ones. All right, so let's go into S3. We already touched on that a little bit. So let's go over to S3. We're going to go over what authorization is in S3. So this is the S3 dashboard, shows everything you really need on the basic level, right? The simplest thing, creating a bucket. On the left side, see all the options. We're going to test this and name a specific bucket. All right, so let's say security practice bucket. And I use the dashes just because it's a lot easier, a lot cleaner, and having spaces can be a lot more iffy. Okay, that's what I'll say. It's a lot iffy. Okay, so the ACLs are disabled. We don't want to have anyone have access to this. You want to start more secure and then ease up. Block public access, obviously. Versioning, this is for basically maintaining variations of this so that anything stored here can be recovered. Okay, you can add tags if you need for your system and being able to track and see what's going where and what's being used and how it's being used and how it should be used, and then your encryption. So I'm just going to try the server side with AWS managed, bucket key enabled, and then click create bucket. Okay, so now we're going to talk about configuring the ownership within it. Oh, it's not unique. That's one thing. This has to be a unique bucket throughout the entire world. Let's see, 30, 30, 2025, 05, 30. How about that? Let's try this. Okay, so that's unique enough. So let's go here, click on the bucket. You go in the permissions tab, look for the object ownership. There we go. So the object ownership, all right, we click on edit. And then from here, we control ownership of the objects that can be written to this bucket. So this would determine who can specify access to it. So this is set up to as disabled because you just want to have lockdown control. You can open it, and then you need to know who actually has access to your account, to the buckets, and who can get onto your network. So right now it's set as the bucket owner. You can go to the object writer, and then you can start opening this up even more. So this simplifies the authorization. Nothing's authorized. ACLs enabled. This can be owned by other accounts. Nothing. Okay? But you'd have to click save and changes to determine which one you want. All right, so understand the authorization flow. It goes in this order. There's the user context, right, at the IAM level. There's the bucket context, where the bucket has the owner, and then the object, where the object owner has the permissions. Okay? So user, bucket, object, going down that hierarchy. So then there's cross-account bucket policies. So we can go back to, let's go back here. We're at permissions. So in the permissions tabs, we can go to the bucket policy, which you showed earlier, and we can set up a cross-account setup, right, within a policy. Here's an example of how this would go. So you set it up with cross-account access. You fill in a correct account number, a correct cross-account number here to get objects, to put objects in this, and you'd update this to your bucket's actual name, right? And you could do this again with another account. So if you had a dev environment, a release control environment, a UAT environment, then you could actually put in that information. You click save changes, and then those IDs would be able to perform those functions. So get bucket, put bucket. So getting stuff from the bucket, putting stuff in the bucket, upload and download basically, and then listing items in the bucket. So it just depends on what you want to do. All right, and you could do this with an IAM role, but it depends on what you want to do. All right, just how do you want to have this set up within your account or with certain resources? So you can do it at the resource level, you can do it at the role level, you can do it at the account level, you can do it at the organization level. All right, so you can also do something like enforce secure traffic, right? So we can do, well, you could, let me not mistake something. You can do all of these within this policy, but you have to configure it correctly. So you could do something like add on an HTTPS policy, right? See this? Which is what this does. Or, let me see. But this should usually be baked in. There we go. Right here. It should be there. So you could also do this. All right, let's try this. Oh my goodness. Okay, this. Okay, so then you have cross account with an HTTPS. Okay, so you can add this in, or you could replace it. Typically, you'll have it programmatically listed, and then you want to have it as unique as possible to either your object level, so your resource level on your bucket, or your role, or your organization policy. And you could do something like you could add in a restriction by IP address. Okay, this is another option as well. Okay, so this would be another option you could have. Oh, one thing I forgot. Okay, one, comma, syntax is important. See, there you go. And then this would be syntax is important as well, comma, and then add this, right? So this is an IP restriction. Okay, so this is bucket name, right? But then not from these IP addresses. Okay, and then you could add in to replace it by the account ID. Okay, so you could restrict an IP address or an ID. Okay, and then you want to make that make sense. So you have this insecure connection. Let's do this, comma. Now what this does is on this bucket, it restricts to or by the user ID. Okay, so this is another example, right? So we're going to cancel that off. Okay. So then you want to configure and block public ACLs, right? This is what we did a little bit earlier. So we're in the S3, public access. Here we go. All right, so public access will be granted through the ACLs, right? This is access control list. Okay, so how do you allow access? You see this? Public access through ACLs, public access to bucket objects to any access, block public access through new public buckets, and block public access in objects through any, right? This is just type, this is time, this is condition. Now we just open it up if we save changes. Like if somebody knows where this bucket is, they can enter it. So we can draw new, we can do this for any access. We can block through new public bucket or access point policies, and then boom, it does the same thing. Okay, so this is the 4 major conditions. So you have all 4 points for maximum security, but you can limit it based off of what you need for your purposes. All right. So then we can let's go to something else that would interact with this, which you covered a little bit earlier. Let's go to VPC. Let's go to, and scroll down a little bit. Where is it? Endpoints. Okay. So we've done this before, but the endpoints allow you to connect to a resource, right? So you can access this resource in the internal network. So let's call it S3 VPC endpoint practice. Okay. For the AWS service, we're going to select, we're going to look for S3. We're using that storage. Click on this. Select your S3, select your VPC. Okay, and then we can create this endpoint. This would be a gateway endpoint, by the way. Okay, as you can see here. Let's create this. All right, this is going to drop a lot of information. You could do it again for an interface endpoint. So do again. Um, interface. Okay, S3. Select our VPC. Oops. And then we can decide about the DNS resolution, which you typically want to enable this so you can get onto AWS's private network and make sure that this can request to the resources. Okay. And you have the record type, IPv4 will be suitable. Select your correct subnets for it. You have your security groups configured and set for it. And then you can do a policy that you can adjust for this or remain, or be more specific. Why isn't this picked? Oh, I didn't pick the subnet. My apologies. Designate IP address. Let's try this. Oh no, I'm gonna let this be managed. Okay. Okay, so this is pending. This will be created. Okay, so this will be going. All right. And then you can update the bucket policy to be restricted to the endpoint. Okay, so we'll do this policy right here. So this is the section you want to update with the VPC endpoint. So you'd find this here and use this ID. You see this VPC E? You can copy this in. And this would be limited so that it does not, anything that does not equal this VPC. Okay? So it would be restrict to the VPC endpoint to deny anything that does not equal this. So it must be this. Okay? So anything outside of this specific endpoint would not be allowed. And then you can create an access point. Okay? So go to S3, access, is this access points? Oops, nope. Access points. You can create an access point over here. So this is a way that a network endpoint could be used for basic S3 operations, right? This would be something where you could do data dumps and jumps and downloads using this. You create the access point with the name for something like, finance team endpoint, right? Select your bucket. We have to look. Here's your buckets. Select your bucket here. Where's your network of origin? So you could do it from the public internet or your VPC. Okay. Oh, it doesn't use it. Oops. So use this. How do you access this? And then you could set a policy that works for it. Does this open? Okay. Here's an example of a policy you'd say. It would allow anything from this ID for this user, finance user, right? And then for this resource, this ID. Okay. And at that point, they'd be able to use this user would be able to access this bucket and perform what they need to. And you could update your main bucket to delegate access to this. Okay, so we're back at this bucket. Okay, so this is a lot, but I just want you to wrap your head around this. so that this bucket ID will be able to be used. And this could be applied to this bucket, and then this bucket with that / and star is anything within the bucket as well. All right. And then you can do a cross origin request where, depending on the headers and the methods, anything from an allowed origin would be able to do certain things. So let's go back to our bucket. Let's see. So our bucket, permissions, where's cores? Cross origin. Okay. So this is a JSON document another JSON policy that you can have, like a web application that can actually interact with this resource or resources in another domain. So let's go in here. We can copy this one. Okay. So this would be the allowed headers. This is a lot. What is allowed to do? And from whatever website and exposure, and then how long this would last. Okay. So this would be able to load from one domain to interact with resources in another. So this follows in with the automation. So this could be, you could have a simple HTML file and have it upload to one S3 bucket as a static website, and then you could test to make sure that it can request to another bucket. Right? So this is where you get automation built into your processes. You can also continue with the access points with multiple cross-region access points. So then you have a lot of buckets that can perform a lot of different ways with specifications. So you can have different buckets in different regions. You can enable your settings, and then you can configure replication across regions. So you have access points where you have versioning, you have multiplication and versioning, and then you have access so that certain things are limited and certain things are not. Okay. And you can also do server access and logging. Let's go over here where you can go for, where's the properties, bucket overview, versioning, server's access logging. Okay. So from here, you can actually set a destination for, let's enable this, right? Something where whenever somebody accesses your buckets, you can specify another bucket to update and deliver logs about this to a centralized location. It could be either on your one account or multiple other accounts, or you can have it on your same account within another region. Okay. And you set a log prefix. You see that bucket name and then the prefix. This sets a definition for it, and you'd save it. And then you could have your CloudTrail or CloudWatch or config or guard duty be able to, well, CloudTrail would be for logging, config would be for compliance, so you actually know what's changing and automated remediations are taking place, and then guard duty for protection from malicious activity. And so you can do it when you're setting up with the ACLs, and then you can have guard duty on the back end, monitoring and updating along the way. And then there's other things you can do with life cycles. So let's go over here with management. And so you could set this bucket to have a lifecycle rule so that while everything now is currently configured for standard tier, where everything can be pulled up automatically, you can go down to a cold or basically a glacier tier, where things can be stored at basically archived, and so nothing can be brought out without notification and a small wait time, usually about 1 to 4 days, I want to say initially. But you want to check to make sure how specific that would be. And that would allow you to have something like your logs that need to be maintained for compliance audits over the next 2, 5, 7 years, maintained but not taking up a lot of your active resources. Because to maintain something, let's see, let's click this. Where is it? Wherever you have your life cycle, the most easy to retrieve costs the most. But you can maintain a lot of your records. It just gets stored in deep storage. Okay. At this point, what you want to do is be able to check your items in your bucket, be able to make sure you can access it from the accounts that you list, be able to verify that the policies you created worked, and then make sure your VPC endpoints are connecting and you can validate access from the access points. Okay. right, next we'll go into Cognito. You touched on a little bit before. So you can enter this here, Cognito. Okay, do this. Could be under identity. Yeah, so security, identity, compliance. So Cognito is good for creating user pools, and those user pools can have federated identities from different services that are not necessarily in your environment, and be able to use this granularly to have attributes that are recognized, like email address, let's say a Facebook login, Google login, something along those lines, to access your applications. Okay, and so you can do this. Let's see, get started. Let's do this. So here's how you get started. You would say authenticated access. And see, you have Facebook, Google, Twitter, Amazon, SAML, OpenID. So this would be auth tokens from an IDC, Apple. There's a bunch of different ways you can go forward. Okay, and a custom developer. So we're going to do this for this. Now I am role name. So let's say Cognito pool role. Okay, or you can use an existing role. So next. So what's the pool ID? Oh, I don't think I. Ooh, do I have one? Uh-oh. I'll skip that for now, because I don't think I actually have one. So I could register this. You can have a lot of different things federated with this. So we could skip that, because I don't want to expose a lot of my information like that. Because I'll burn this account, but I don't want to burn all my other stuff. So you use all the IDs available for this. Let's skip all of that. And you could set 100 or 360 user pool. Okay. And then you could have the different types of authentications through API requests to be able to get them to show a trust token, trust identity token, and then assume the role from that token, right? So with this, basically your Facebook would log in to here, be able to say, hey, this is his Facebook. He has this on his device. You would regularly see this if you use any type of authentication. So we'll just go for the basic flow and click next. And you show what your authenticated, look, user access to authenticate, all these different types. This is the name of the role. We skipped all this, so none of this will work. And then we can create the identity pool. Okay. And so at that point, you'd be able to let's try and create it. Let's see if what this does. All right. So then at this point, and we can go to our user pools. We can create. Let's try and create a user pool. Did we already try and do this? Yeah. Let's try an application. Let's try a traditional web application. That's fine. So that's just a typical name. Wait, did I create the? Let's leave this for a second. Identity pool. Let's click on this. Yeah, nothing's authenticated, so this doesn't even matter. Let's try the user pool. Okay. Let's create a basic user pool. Attributes. There you go. And then a return URL. So with successful sign-in, this could go to your app webpage.com. Something that your application would live on. I don't even know if this will work. Because I'm just not entering a lot of this. Because there's a lot of different authentication information that needs to go through here for variables and whatnot. So what's the development platform? So then you can start building a lot of this out. And you need to keep a lot of this information so that when you configure this, you have this, look at this, for your home page, for your login, callbacks. But there's a lot that goes into creating the application. We're going to go to the overview. Okay, and so at this point, you could do a lot. All right, so you could do your clients, add an application client, and continue going forward with this. and then create a different name. You can start updating this to make sure everything works. Then you can create a domain for this to go forward from, like your website that you own, and then your domain that you own. I'm sorry, that you're turning into a web application. And then you can use your identity pools to be able to access this as federated sites. So somebody would use your web application, being able to access it from Facebook, from Google, from Twitter, and then you'd have IAM roles like the following that would be customized for this. So let me show you what this looks like. Okay, so this is going to be interesting. So this would show the bucket with your identity, right? And the database information that this identity would put through with your ID in that database for your tables. And so a lot of this would be in the dynamic global database. I think it's global, DynamoDB, right? So a lot of this would be running through to make sure it's authenticated. And you could customize the authentication policy with the following, right? Where you could bake this in for the S3 object that would be in here for your public side. And then from there, you could update the identity pool to expand the authentication providers. So you could use this to choose rules like for each user, for each pool, and you could create rules based on the type of tokens that you're getting from your different services. You know, think stuff like Google, Facebook, etc. Okay, and at that point, you could have a custom rule for like something internal. If you're using this as an internal application and you have a user who's on Google Workspace, and then they want to get access to your application, they can use their Google email address to access the application. Boom. Now, you can also integrate this with API Gateway. Let's go for this. Gateway. So you can build and manage this. We touched into this a little bit. And so you can have this API do a lot more automations between this. So it sends a lot of API calls, pulls. So you put your different API methods, their get and post, and basically you can authenticate and request different information. And so you'd select your Cognito authorizer, and then you'd add scopes so that it could use this to authorize your identities and access to the application, right? To either deploy the API and then invoke the information for the URL. And this comes into a lot of different a lot of different. So we can go with more complexity as far as how do you configure this for load balancing. So all these requests, if this is a public application or a more public application, say at a large enterprise, then you'd have a pool of users that would have to do this with internal balancing of one, how many users, what type of users are they, what access do they have, and then two, what version, what application are they going towards, and then how is that actually going to be updated so that they have the most up to date or whatever version you need, and then they would be authenticated and guided to be able to use the correct version. So there's a lot to grasp there, and to create all of this would be a lot. Okay, but you're seeing how a lot of these tools interact to basically make sure you have a secured, authenticated, and regulated environment for your applications, your security and authentication levels, and then what are you actually building on top of that for the application itself that can be accessed, how it would be accessed, how it would be used, how would the use be limited based on the scope of what the user or the person in that pool via how they logged in would be able to access this. So we're gonna tighten this up portion. So remember a couple of things, right? Remember to set your password and access points to be solid, right? Make sure to use any security features that are baked in, meaning in your policies and your authentication methods and any IAM you're going to have there. Make sure you use least privilege. Be specific about the resources, if that's buckets, if that's APIs, anything along those lines. Be specific. Understand what you allow, what you deny, how much you allow, how much you deny, who you allow it, who you disallow it or deny it to. And then make sure you're monitoring. So you can monitor all this via credential usage via CloudTrail. Okay. And then you use the endpoints, like the VPC endpoints for private connectivity, and make sure that you have your encryption enabled so that Anything in your storage, your buckets, would actually be encrypted at rest, and anything going towards, let's say, through your endpoint would be encrypted in transit. So then you're talking about how you'd want this with MTLS or um, TLS 1.3 to make sure that anything along those lines, or you could have an SSL or TLS certificate. So it just depends on what your purpose is supposed to be accomplishing, right? If it's internal or outside of the network, and what your goal is for the users, the applications, and the layers, okay? And then you can audit this regularly and update your configurations as needed. All right, so let's go over IAM Identity Center. All right. So we're in IAM Identity. Where is it? It's usually, no, I know where it is. Security, IAM Identity Center. Okay. So this is a centralized access management for multiple AWS accounts and business application. So this is how you would set this up. This is going to be a lot, but we're going to try and tighten it up. So to initially do this, you go to Identity Center. Make sure you're in your desired region. So we're in Northern Virginia, which is typically the default one, US East 1. See here, right? This is how you'd make sure everything would work. Okay, so you click enable on, where am I seeing it? Why don't I see it? Prevent account instances. Hmm. Confirm identity source. Huh. That's the main one. I think it's already enabled. Never mind. Okay, so you can choose any organization instance for single or multi-account, but typically for multi-account access. Okay, and so typically an account would be for a single account. You know, you can have one account in one region. You could do some things cross-regionally, but that requires a different setup. The organization is better at managing multiple accounts, where you could do a lot more um, versatility. Okay, and then you want to look at your default configurations. All right, so you go into your accounts. Let's see. Got your AWS Access Portal here. So this is for easy use for this. Don't worry, I'm going to delete this very soon. I'm checking my billing every night, so don't be using my information if I let something slip. You want to make sure you know your identity center. Let's see. Oh gosh. Where am I seeing this? Where am I seeing? Ah, there. Identity center. You want to confirm all this information here. And so you want to make sure this is set up for the region that you want to use. And any instance arms, right? You use this for API or command line interface and access. And your access portal URL, you can edit this, right? You can customize if you need this so that you have an internal user. Okay. So in this, you can make some updates to customize this, right? So you can go to, why am I not seeing this? So you can enable identity enhancements, access control, and you can enable this for use with your on-prem Active Directory. So you can sync between users. You can have SAML 2.0. So that would work for Okta or some other service like security assertion markup language. And then security asserted? Yeah, I think that's right. And you can configure the built-in identity store, which is typically what most people do. Most people keep this as a default selection. They might do a couple of different things. They might enable this, enhance identity actions, right? They might do a little bit with authentication. So change the authentication, MFA, just very basic stuff. Okay. Or you can configure this for an external identity provider. Okay. So where is this? Identity source action. Let's change the identity source. So this is where you can go for Active Directory, right? Or you can do the SAML or IDP with, yeah, this is SAML. And you can go to Active Directory. You can set this up, all right? What's the existing ones? So you have to get that information from your Active Directory and then sync this. Okay, we can go back. You can do this for SAML. And then you could start swapping this in and out, and then making sure this works with that SAML. Okay. And most organizations will have some combination of both, just because you want a very secure environment. All right. And then from here, the identity center, first you can create a group. Let's call this practice group. What? Practice security group. Okay. And a description, add users. Let's add my guy. All right. And then we can create users. So go to users, add a user, uh, practice user, send an email to that user, all this stuff. Okay. And then you'd be good to go. All right. Under that information, assign it to a group, and you could be good to go. And you can configure MFA on that group or that user, and you should be good to go. All right. You can also do, let's see, permission sets. Let's see if we can do this. Let's go for here. So in permission sets, you can create a permission set. Okay. So let's say predefined, or we're going to do custom. So you do predefined. You can see this set up for what you would typically have, for however you would want to have this for a user's permission access to the AWS account, right? This is how you're going to be used or integrated into your team's organization. Okay. You'd have admin access. That would be easy. That's not going to happen though. Maybe your supervisor is supervisor, which they really shouldn't be because they're typically not going to be on it. So you can then update this for different permission sets. This is where IAM comes in, right? Different managed policies. You can attach them depending on how they've been designed by your admin, or you could do it programmatically in here, and you can set permissions boundaries as well. Okay. So you click through, get the details, and then you review. But nothing has been added onto this, so no worries. Okay. And you could do this for your production environment, your database admin, whatever you think you could do. You could do it multi-account as well. Okay. And then you could verify account access and make sure that everyone who's added, and you can check to see whatever user was created has the right permission set, is assigned to the correct user group, and then has login access. Then at that point, you can add them to applications that they might be able to use. And so you could have any AWS managed applications you have in here, or you can add, oh, there's nothing in here. Oh, or you can do your customer manage where you can add that. So let's add the application. You could do an application from the marketplace, which there are tons, or you can have one that you already own. Okay. And you can set this up with however you need to. So this could be anything from a mailer, a Salesforce, CRM type of situation, or some SAML application. And then you could set this up for attribute access, which is another thing. Let me see if we can do that. Wait, let me go back over here. Let's see if I can cover this. So add application, have an application. Let's go next. Is that in here? Access portal. I don't think it's going to make me yet. Practice application. All right. And so then you start to talk about authentication between this. Authentication and access is very important. Okay. At this point, you can start signing and managing what's going on here. There's a lot that goes on here. Yeah, I have to get a token. Well, I'm not going to do that. But at this point, you make sure that the token would be able to verify between the application and AWS. And between there, you'd make sure that you could assign the correct users or groups or roles to the application. And you set the permission sets to be able to work with whatever resources you need, which would, in this case, would be the application. All right. And then at a certain point, you can do, I'm going to stop on this one. You can do different updates to make sure that even your access portal is different. Okay. But that is a whole different thing. We're starting talking about, do you want to configure this so that you can customize it to your company. Let's say walmart.awsapps.com, and then update the logo, and then make sure that this shows that the AWS portal is customized for your organization, right? And then you can allow single sign-on between your own native applications that your organization owns and the AWS environment, and then create a support email that works with this with your own domain. And that is another level that, unless you're the IAM admin, you won't have to go. But you see that there's a lot of different ways that IAM can be used here. And some things to remember. Remember least privilege. Remember to review a lot. What is actually out there that you provision. We've gone through a lot of pages today. Look at the separation of who should be using this. Should the finance have access to the database? Did the database have access to your billing? Did your billing have access to your media? There's a bunch of different ways. Have some security in there. So MFA, session management, conditional access based on ID, on attributes like email or name or domain. And then integrate this with logging and monitoring, like CloudWatch or CloudTrail, and be able to audit that on a regular basis. And make sure you're using this in a secure manner through, let's say, VPC endpoints for private connectivity, and that you've limited the IPs that can't access it, and then how it's encrypted when they are accessing. Okay, and then at that point, you're trying to get through a lot of information. So we went through a good amount about IAM. I'm trying to think if there's anything else we might be missing today. So we went over Active Directory, we went over directories, went over the SAML, talked about how it relates with um, with applications, with access. And so I would want to say the last thing is to remember the exam, right? Think of what you manage, what is managed, what you manage, which is a lot. What AWS can manage, which is some things that AWS uses to verify. And then what are some security, trust, synchronization, policy analysis, encryption, storage, account, organization, user, group, relationships. Like there's a lot of different terms I just threw out there, but like think about how all those things work together. At the organization, what's accessible? At the group level, at the user level, is there a user level used? At the role level. And then what type of resources are being accessed? How are they being accessed and authenticated? How is that authentication enabling it to do whatever? Perform a function? What's performing that function? The user with a role, the resource like the EC2 accessing the bucket. There's a lot that goes on here. And then is that user coming from their local organization's environment? They're working at walmart.com, but they're in the AWS environment. So how does this form a seamless, secure, operationally efficient environment? And that is where the infrastructure person becomes very important when they become the infrastructure and security person. So if you understand how these work together, how you consider your architecture, how you can troubleshoot it, how you can maintain trust relationships between all of this, maintain security best practices, you're going to be ready to pass your exam and be ready to be dynamic in the cloud. So this will be a wrap up of this section. The next section we're going to cover is data protection. Thank you for joining me.